My dad changed stations in the Navy. We went from Norfolk, Virginia, to near a submarine base in Camden County, Georgia, back in 2007. I was beginning high school. The moment we moved in, I always felt weird, like I was never alone. Our house came with an alarm system that my parents, and the first happening was when my mom hired a lawn guy to mow our yard, and the system randomly went off while we were away and while he was cutting our grass. We had to go back because the cops arrested the guy, and he adamantly swears that he never tried to open any doors. We believed him, but thought nothing of the alarm going off. Maybe a malfunction. Either way, he never came back after. However, the alarm going off became a nightly occurrence, waking us up from anywhere between 12 to 5 a.m. for 3 months. We were more annoyed than frightened, and every now and then I would hear soft knocks on my wall, as if someone or something was trying to get my attention. I ignored them. Another weird thing while this was happening was my sister, who was 3, would point up to the walls in a toddler voice, "Look, baby, help, help, baby." Me and my mom would look at each other, slack-jawed. "What baby?" Mom would ask. But she kept insisting that we help this invisible baby up on our wall. Our dog would also stare up at the wall as well, making us even more unnerved. My sister would also claim there were these 2 kids that flew around her room who were all white and gave her candy. We feigned ignorance and hoped that it was just her imagination. We also had a couple friends stay over until they got back on their feet. One of them said while going to the bathroom, she heard someone talking on the baby monitor with a man's voice. The only other man in the house was asleep. Also, the baby monitor on my sister's end couldn't hear my mom talking, as it was a one-way comm system. We chalked it up to radio interference and moved on. However, a few nights later, while I was going to the bathroom, I saw my first and only apparition in my sister's room. It was like an outline of a person, no features, nothing distinct, other than this thing towered over me. I screamed and woke up the whole house, and when everyone came to investigate, the outlined being was gone. And not wanting to tell everyone I woke them up for seeing a ghost, I lied and said I saw someone's face peeping into the window. Cops were called, and there was no way in hell I was going to tell the officer, yeah, I got you guys out here at 2 a.m. because I saw a spooky boy in my sister's bedroom. Like, seriously, what do you even tell people when you see something like that? Especially skeptics. Maybe a couple years later, my grandma came down to visit. While sleeping in the living room, she yelled for my mom, claiming our front door was violently shaking as if someone was trying to break in, and is also the one time our alarm doesn't go off. When she went and looked, it stopped and nothing was there. A few isolated incidents would be my parents bought my sister this Dora balloon, and if you hit it, it would sing "Happy Birthday to You" in both English and Spanish. At night, this thing would go off on its own, singing, waking my parents up as it floated in the kitchen. House was built weird. The kitchen was off to the side and connected to the master bedroom and garage. Not how I design a house, but hey. And my mother claimed to feel like there was always someone behind her, or she'd see someone beside her, and when she looked, they were gone. As for the house history, there's not a lot known. It was built in 1985, I want to say, so obviously one wouldn't think haunted home, and was bought during a foreclosure. The owners that we bought from were Christian and friendly enough. Know this because we managed to attend the same church that they went to, so I don't know why a place like that would be haunted. We only lived there for 4 years. We moved after Dad retired. Dad was a huge skeptic, but my mom eventually told me you weren't alone in thinking there was something wrong with that place. A friend who rode the bus with me mentioned that there were Satanists in the neighborhood, but I brushed the idea off as it sounded too cliche. Also, I'm not the type that likes to be put out in public, but whenever my parents left for all-day weekend trips going into Florida, I went with them because I did not want to be alone with whatever it was in that house. For a little bit of background, I no longer live on the same property, but this particular house always gave me bad vibes. And I had a very few minor paranormal experiences I would shake off as a coincidence or imagination, but I've always felt a connection to the paranormal, even as a child, which if this does well, I'll give you some more experiences of mine. So a few years ago in my old house, I've been struggling to sleep for a while, and on this particular night, I'd been reading pretty late. I would say around 2 a.m., and needed to get up to go to the bathroom. My room was very small, basically a glorified walk in closet, despite the house being quite large. It was on the second floor in a long hallway. In order to get to the bathroom, I had to pass the stairwell, but I had no issues whilst going there. When I washed my hands, I distinctly remember how cold the room was, and that the water had a slight brown tinge to it, dirty even, and wasn't running very well, but I didn't pay much mind to it. I was living with my parents at the time, so I would get my dad to look at it in the morning. On my way back, just as I was passing the staircase, I heard my mum call me from downstairs saying, "Harry, come downstairs. Me and dad have a new laptop for you." I have no idea why, but sheer dread flooded my body. I started trembling as the temperature dropped suddenly, but I started sweating. For some reason, the only thing running through my head in that moment was, "That's not my mother. If I go down there, I'm going to die." It wasn't that this voice sounded like my mother, it was my mother's voice, as if it had been borrowed or something, I don't know. But I took off down the hall and into the bedroom like a child. I have no idea what would have happened to me if I went downstairs, but I'm glad I didn't. I asked both my mother and father about it a couple days afterwards. I was afraid to even acknowledge that it had happened, and both denied it ever happening, and they gave me a very odd look of concern. In my travels, I've gone out of my way to visit haunted locations. I've rented a room at the Haunted Roosevelt Hotel in Hollywood. I've travelled to Salem, MA, and toured all the haunted spots. Been to castles in Germany, as well as concentration camp Dachau. I've gone to the Whaley House in San Diego. I've done midnight lantern tours of the Winchester House and haunted Gettysburg. Visited every supposed haunted location in every country I've visited, as well as around the States. I mention this because, although I did have a feeling at the Whaley House in San Diego, California, most of the locations were just a tourist spot for me, mostly. I've had experiences in other places that I was not expecting. For example, a church in Dublin. This may sound weird, but it's at the times I wasn't expecting something to happen that it did. My experience at the church in Dublin was I kept hearing like a dull noise behind me. I was inside with my camcorder. This was back in the early 2000s. I kept feeling like my stomach was turning and like very depressed. Once I left the church, I felt normal after I ate and drank a beer. When I got back home, I played my videotape to my friends to show them my trip. I started to tell them about my experience. My friend said, "Hey, turn up the volume." You could hear crying in the background, but not like one person, but many. The odd thing about that video cassette is for some explained reason, it later went missing. I live alone, so no one took it from me. Just till this day, I never found it again. Another experience was in Niagara Falls. Later in life, when I met my bride, we went to Niagara Falls for our honeymoon. Our hotel room was haunted, and once again, I felt something at Old Fort Niagara. My wife was after a while begging to leave the place. Another thing happened to me once when I was traveling for business. I was staying in some small town north of Seattle. I don't remember the name of the hotel, but at night, someone knocked on my door. I just happened to be awake and on my laptop, so I jumped and looked through the peephole, and no one was there. I opened my door and no one down either side of the hallway. No one could have been that fast, as I was in the middle of the hall, but still, no one was there. A few days ago, my wife complained to me that she heard someone in our backyard moving one of our patio chairs. It's odd, we have a ring spotlight camera out back, and it didn't pick up anything. but she said she heard one of our chairs being moved. I told her she must have imagined it. I looked out back, didn't see our side gates open. It wasn't windy, and even on what we would call windy days, our patio furniture is too heavy to move on its own. Other than a stray cat, we don't have any large animals that could jump our fence. Last night at about 1 am, I woke up because I heard someone moving our patio chair and bump it to the table. Literally, I jumped from my bed and looked out the window. Nothing. Both gates closed, our ring camera didn't pick up anything, but on my shed I have a motion light and it was on. No one could have been that quick to jump a fence from the time I heard it till I looked out the window. It wasn't windy last night, but like I've said, our backyard doesn't get high winds or anything, and we never had wind move our furniture. When I was in high school, back in the early 1990s, I used to do many odd jobs. I never worked at McDonald's or Taco Bell like my friends, but instead, I worked off and on at an auto mechanic shop. I worked for a flooring contractor as a labourer. I actually worked several construction and demolition jobs as well as scalping concert tickets. I used to make a lot of money doing this stuff and always liked working with my hands. When I worked for a contractor, we once did a demolition job at a mortuary, and we worked from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., so we were out of there during business hours. We also did some restaurants, bars, and stores, usually working overnight since we couldn't be there during business hours. This worked perfect for me, and I would work sometimes over the weekend or 1 or 2 nights in a row. Like I said, I made a lot of money doing that kind of stuff. Way more than my friends did at fast food places, working after school every day. One time, however, I was dropped off at an empty house. This was unusual because it was a Saturday morning job, which I didn't care because this meant the night was mine free. It was also unusual because it was a house. We mainly did commercial stuff for the contractor. So, just for clarification, I worked under the table for almost all my jobs that I did back then. I was underage, but was as skilled as any adult, even more so than a few of the other workers. This one Saturday, I was dropped off at an empty house. My job was to tear out all the flooring, cabinets, tiles, sinks, toilets, well, everything except drywall and doors. I grew up in a somewhat remote town, and this house was even more remote. Just tumbleweeds outside, and the house, if I remember, had a 1960s country look to it. So I go inside, and the idea was just to gut the house and pull everything else in the driveway to be hauled away later. I brought my ice chest with drinks and lunch. The job should only have taken me about the day. I knew they'd be back for me about 4 to 6 p.m. I remember getting started in the kitchen, and I remember being upset that there was no electricity on because my radio's battery was almost dead. This is where things start getting fuzzy. I remember looking around at the house and making a mental note of everything I needed to tear out. I remember feeling like, well, a bad feeling in the house. It was older, not like it had been abandoned for a long time, but like maybe someone old lived in there for decades and never updated anything. I started to have weird feelings that soon led to complete lack of any power. Like literally, I felt like I had no energy. I ended up in a back room with the radio playing in the kitchen, and the next thing I knew, it was evening. I felt like I startled myself to wake up. I remember feeling like, where the hell am I? I got up, and it was silent. No noise, no light. I stumble outside and look around, and was shocked to see that hours passed nearly the entire day. I went back in and started gathering my stuff, and just locked up and waited outside for my ride to get me. I kind of got yelled at, but since I got paid for what I did and not time, it wasn't a huge deal. But I did refuse to go back out there, and two guys I went out the following week and emptied the house out. Just so I know, it's going to ask. No, I didn't use any drugs or alcohol. I've actually always been very anti-drug. Seeing my older brother spiral down with his life at an early age made me against all drugs. I wasn't sick, and there was no gas or propane on at the house, so no fumes caused it. Also, like I said before, I didn't work every day, and when I was young, I had tons of energy that I could have demoed that entire house by lunch. The house just took all my energy and knocked me out. I wouldn't have normally slept like that in a dirty job site. especially one that gives me the creeps inside. Yesterday, I was home alone. I took the day off of work to do a bunch of chores around the house. One of the things I had to do was turn in our old cable equipment and DSL router and get new equipment and install it. My house was built in the early 1950s. There is the upstairs part. We have a downstairs part that's a new addition, built sometime in the early 2000s. I only mention this so you can understand the upstairs of the house is raised foundation with wooden floors throughout. The new addition is downstairs on concrete foundation. Upstairs, you can hear footsteps of someone walking around with shoes on. With shoes off downstairs, it's a little harder to hear because there's carpeting and it's on concrete. So if someone was running across the house on the upstairs older part of the house, it's loud and echoey. Yesterday I was home alone. It was early in the afternoon. I was downstairs installing the new DSL router on the very far corner of the downstairs part of the house. As I was laying on the floor trying to locate the cables and put them in the right places, I heard a loud running across coming from the upstairs older part of the house. It isn't possible that someone came in and left because all the doors and windows have sensors that make a chime when a door or window is open. I did not hear a chime, and no one who lived in the house should have been home. My wife was at work, and my son was at school. I quickly got up and tried my best to listen to see if there was really someone in the house. I went to the upstairs older part of the house and looked through each bedroom of the kitchen, bathrooms, front door was locked. There's no way that anyone could have entered the house, run through it, and left. I don't know what I heard, but it was definitely someone running through the upstairs part of my house. When I was in my mid 20s, I had a girlfriend that was 10 years older than me. I lived with her 3+ weeks out of the month. When I didn't, I would sleep in the room I shared with my brother at my parents' home. One night, about 3:30 in the morning, I slowly awoke to the warm feeling of a nude woman behind me. She was up against me to the point that I could make out her body type and grooming habits. Her arm was around my waist and was giving off some heat. That is most likely what woke me up. As I was awakening, I made out the fact that I was at my parents' house and my brother was sleeping in the bed across from me. At that point, I was like, who the hell's behind me? I actually waited until I knew I was completely awake, moved my hands and feet a little. Meanwhile, I could feel the hot breath and breathing behind me. I jumped up as fast as I could and threw the blanket off. Looked down, and there was no one there. My brother was like, what the fuck? And I was feeling the bed that was still warm to the touch behind where I thought I was sleeping. I was really expecting to find someone. My childhood home is haunted, but mostly steps and opening and closing of doors. My father said he saw a blonde girl in the hall once, but in the 17 years I lived there, this was by far the most intense. So I was 18, almost 19 when this happened, which would have put this back in 2013. My family and I lived in one close unit due to finances, which included me, my parents, my little sister 15, my older sister 23, her husband 25, and their daughters 3 and 2. We also had a dog and about 5 cats with us at the time. Yeah, I know, it's a lot. Long story short, we were moving down from a part of northern Florida down to a more of the central area. The new house we were supposed to go to into wasn't quite ready yet, so instead of fighting with a hotel for weeks on end, we decided to rent a house. An owner in the area had been nice enough to rent it to us for pretty cheap for a few weeks, which makes sense later. So right off the bat, the place wasn't terrible. According to the owner, the place had been built in the 1950s, but no one had officially owned it and lived in it since the early 2000s. It had pretty much just been passed to different owners and renters. The neighbourhood? Not the best. It was an older place, and a few of the yards, thankfully not ours, hadn't been tended to, overgrown with weeds and wild plants that could go up a couple of feet up your legs. In Florida, you don't mess with those. Not only can deadly bugs and snakes be hiding in there, but a lot of the plants have the ability to sting you and mess your skin up. Hence why Florida is discount Australia, as we call it down here. I guess calling someone in to deal with the wild lawns was too much money or too much effort, especially since some of these homes didn't look like they were being lived in. The insanity didn't really start until we first brought the cats inside. Our orange tabby, who was well known for being super chill and not giving two shits, acting like he'd lost his mind, yowling and scratching at all the doors like he was trying to get away from something, until I opened up a door to a bedroom. As soon as he could, he took a dive under the bed and hissed at anyone who tried to ease him out. It took him nearly a full 24 hours, even going to the bathroom under there before he came out. Note, all tile flooring, so while gross, this at least wasn't an issue to clean up. For the most part, other than that, things went well for the first few days. Rushed, cramped, but good. After about 3 days, my dad decided to return to a hotel closer to his new workplace, paid for by the company, of course, and my mom decided to go with him, leaving the rest of us teens, young adults, and toddlers at the house. We were in an older suburb in a pretty busy area and had a couple different cars, so we weren't being abandoned. Long story short, that's when the nightmares started. I can't remember any prior experiences there other than the cat. All of us, including the kids, had horrible nightmares of either being chased or unalived, as it were. I don't remember all of the nightmares everyone mentioned, but I remember mine pretty clearly, of course. I woke up in a dark basement in a place I'd never seen and just knew something was after me. I had to run, knowing whatever it was always there and wouldn't give up. I woke up in a cold sweat. This kept happening every other night, and nearly a week in, my little sister, brilliant on her part, decided to hit up an online friend she'd had for years who lived an hour away to ask if she could stay with them, especially after the 3-year-old started talking about scary lady walking across the house. After said friend's parents came to pick her up, she spent the next 2 weeks with pizza and cable TV and no ghost. Godspeed, youngling. Real quick, in the house living room, there was this window that overlooked the back garden. It had a whole high area made of brick and ceramic where I suppose you could put plants to get food, good lighting. But it also served as a great place where my sister would let her two little ones stand up and walk around, so they could see the back garden and all the wild lizards running around. For context, it was almost big enough for an adult to curl up on, so there was plenty of space. Probably about 4 feet from the ground. And yes, my sister would monitor her kids while they were playing up there, obviously. But this detail is important later. So anyway, the 3-year-old started seeing a scary lady around the house. We'd ask her exactly what she'd seen as we were starting to gather. Not all was right in the land of Oz. But as you'd guess, 3-year-olds aren't great informants. It was just stuff about the scary lady and how she was really mean. Mind you, we'd gathered by this point that the place was haunted. One does not simply wander into Mordor and brush off the horrific bullshit placed before them. The problem was we couldn't leave. No one else had anywhere to go, especially with that many pets. The hotels weren't animal friendly, and while you can hide one cat, 4 extras and a whole ass £50 dog are a different story. So then, I had my own encounter with this thing. It was close to maybe 2 weeks of a 3-week stay. I'd been laying in bed listening to music so I could stim and calm down. I have ASD and ADHD, so it's a method I use before I can sleep. I was fully awake. I hadn't gone to sleep yet. I hadn't taken any medication. The blinds on my window had stopped working God knows how long ago, so there was plenty of moonlight coming in, illuminating most of the room. I looked down to check my iPod Nano, back when those were a thing, and after putting it back down, looked up to see a shadowy figure standing right near my head to the right, looming over me. I distinctly remember it was 10:11 p.m, since, like I said, I'd just checked my iPod and had seen the clock in the upper part of the screen. Let me be perfectly clear, I was not paralysed. I could move, and I know that because I grabbed the bed sheets, nearly peed myself, and had to actively think about not moving or screaming. My logic at the time was that this thing was uncomfortably close, and if I gave it reason to, it could mess me up. So I stayed there, eyes locked on where this face should have been, staring. There wasn't any big finale, any climax. It faded out of existence in a matter of seconds, leaving me alone and, thankfully, my bed dry. When we were rounding up our last couple of days there, all of us, me, my older sister, and my brother in law, were eagerly packing up our things ahead of time. We wanted out and fast, so that things could get done in a more timely manner with the things my sister's family had brought. My brother in law gathered things up while my sister watched the kids, letting them play up on the earlier mentioned windowsill. Mind you, I didn't see this happen. I only heard about it shortly after. I'd been in the room I'd been staying in, reading one of the books I'd brought with me in my bag. My sister swore by this a couple of times, but after that could never bring herself to talk about this story again, understandably. She'd been watching both of her girls as they looked through the window and out at the garden when the dog started to bark, probably at someone taking a walk. She swears she turned her back for only a moment or two, yelling at the dog a few times to quiet down since she couldn't just run over and leave her girls. She turned back just in time to see a 2-year-old with a dazed look on her face, the cords from the blinds wrapped around her neck, arms outstretched, walking towards the very edge of the ledge. Naturally, she plucked up my niece, and while she doesn't usually condone spanking in that kind of situation, giving my sister a swat on the thigh was the first thing that came to mind. She said her 2-year-old, a usually endlessly wild little girl, jolted and gasped as if coming to her senses, sat completely still in her arms, and then burst into tears. She hadn't even reacted when my sister grabbed her. We were done. We peeled out of there real quick. After that, it was worth looking for other options, no matter how stressful it would be. I still live relatively close to this house, probably no more than a 15-minute drive across town. Yes, I remember exactly where it is and what it looks like. Yes, I went by there recently to get a peek at the place, to see some other poor sap's car in the driveway. No, I didn't stop the car or get out. Fuck that, and fuck that house. This was how I got interested, found out I was sensitive to a few things, and became an occultist and practitioner in my more recent years. There was lots more to this story, but these were all the huge details, and all I could reasonably cover. It happens almost every time, every day, at random times, but only when I'm alone at home. This began mostly being noticeable several months ago. TVs come on in different rooms that I'm in. I have a knee-jerk reaction to look behind me or check doorways constantly over and over again, because I'm absolutely convinced of the presence of other people around me. I get a static feeling lingering in the air and goosebumps up and down my arms. Sometimes I get tapped or poked. I hear things falling or being moved or opened, for example the kitchen, and even came home to my huge dresser upside down with all 3 drawers pulled out and their contents emptied. I had a headache and wanted ibuprofen. I was in the middle of a League of Legends grind day. I couldn't find the ibuprofen. I got mad and turned back on my gaming computer and put on my headset. I was hit in the back of the head with an Alev bottle. I literally laugh about this one all the time actually. What the actual fuck? Sometimes I would hear something. I've been answered with several things. 4 main vocal disturbances in my life have shocked me to my core. My very first one was in my childhood home. I was awoken around 4 a.m. as a young girl by hearing the voice of a young boy quietly, innocently go, "Hello?" Never again I experienced anything quite like that until now, nor spoke about it. The next 3 are all from the past few months. I saw a large shadow pass over my curtain on my window, and I shouted, "Who are you?" And a man's voice, younger but not old, 30s maybe, answered, "You can hear me?" Then he vanished. I did not reply. I sat in my bedroom speaking to my dogs. I do this a lot. I purchased a new book off Amazon. I was opening the box on my floor. I said, "Honestly, haven't read in years. I'm very excited for it." A woman, older, gravelly voice, but not croaky, more delicate, whispered, "That's great, my name." As I jumped up, extremely frightened, I heard again, "No, please, tell me more." The voice came from the hallway. I grabbed my keys and ran out my door and left. I never shook the energy off me the entire day. The last one is the most haunting one. I awoke for only the second time in my 22 years of life to someone awaking me. This time, a male scream. It was lengthy and drawn out. It came and rattled from the gut. It was core breaking. It was extremely loud and physically audible. It did not feel manifested from my mind. It ripped me from the dream I was coherently having and remembering at the time. I had absolutely nothing to do with it either. It was a dream in the universe of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, one of my favourites. I like tunes. The directional sound waves came from underneath me, actually, almost as if rising from beneath my pillow, upward, through my body and towards the ceiling. Here are some other things I'm realising. My brand new phone loses full charge in 2 hours, maybe less. There are suddenly more pests or bugs, mainly flies and gnats, and this has never been an issue before in my 4 years of living alone in the same place. I'm having bad sleep paralysis at night. I've developed a strange paranoia of open doorways. All doors must be shut. Things go missing in the spot where I set them down and then later reappear only after I get far, far too frustrated. I feel a weird sense of protection from both my dogs. I keep them both in the one room I usually am in for the day, with me to closely monitor the sounds and make sure they are not coming from upstairs or from them messing about on their own, but I am on the basement floor. One of my dogs is severely disabled. I don't know why I feel protection radiating from her, perhaps because she has the most beautiful soul of an animal. I'm convinced paranormal activity stays outside of the room she is in. This is also why I know if I see something destroyed, it's kind of hard to blame a paralyzed dog about it. I do have a Ouija board that I used once, but otherwise purchased because it was an original 1963, or some sort, 1960 something, from a private seller at an auction. I purchased it 3 years ago. I never had any problems. I don't think it is related. I did have one incident that never followed up or became anything else. These experiences are all manifesting from early this year. I don't really believe in the paranormal. Until now. The house I used to live in was in a rural area. It was an older house built in the 60s. There were about 6 acres of land on the property, and it was near the end of a dirt road neighbourhood. That's what I called it. Pretty much, there were 6 houses on a relatively long dirt road. The house I lived in was second to last on the dirt road. Only 2 other houses in the neighbourhood were occupied at the time we moved in. I was about 7 at the time. I remember being really excited at first because I was dreaming about getting all these different animals. And we did eventually get cats, dogs, chickens, and goats. After about a month, I decided I was finally brave enough to explore the area around the house. There was an old, dilapidated chicken coop near the front of the property, next to a patch of woods. My stepfather was in the process of rebuilding it. I remember trying to enter the woods near the chicken coop, and it felt wrong. That's the only way I could describe it. It just felt wrong, like it wasn't supposed to be there, so I left. I would only realize years later that was just the first experience. Within the first 6 months of living there, I begged my parents for a pair of curtains for my room. My room was facing the backyard and the greater wooded area, and I constantly felt like I was being watched, and I hated it. I was in near hysterics about it until they finally got me curtains, and that only provided a bit of comfort. As the years went on, I knew something was wrong with that house and the area around it. I knew there were places on that land I shouldn't go and I should avoid. I used to have dreams looking back on it. I believe it was sleep paralysis, but as a child, I just put them off as weird, creepy dreams. I also had a night terror once, and it was probably one of the worst nights of my life and the worst personal experience I had at that house. There were shadows everywhere and they were yelling over each other, and I couldn't understand them. I was screaming for my parents until my voice went out and I couldn't speak anymore. No one heard me. It fucked me up for a long time. I still experienced other things. There was a crawl space behind my closet and I would hear things moving around and making noises, inside of it occasionally. I tried to ignore it, and there was a constant presence in my room and the next room to mine. Sometimes it got so overwhelming, I couldn't stand to be in that room and I had to go sleep with my parents in a living room. And then there were a couple times I heard weird noises during the night when I was staying up watching TV. It sounded like coyotes, but distorted and just wrong. That's just the closest sound I can compare it to. I think I know what it was, but I won't say its name. And then there was the thing I was most terrified of, and it was why I always avoided the entrance to the attic, because there was a thing in the attic, an awful thing. I never saw it and never heard it, thank God I didn't. But just walking past or near the entrance to the attic would make me terrified, sick, and uneasy. None of the animals would go near or past it either. After my parents divorced, my mom and I left the house, and I'm glad we did, because according to my mother's ex husband, it got a lot worse. But that's not my experience to share. I honestly just chalked it all up to me being an anxious kid until recently, when I was talking to my mother's ex husband, who recently moved out of that house. I've known that man my entire life, and I've never seen or heard him so terrified. Even my mother has experienced things in that house, and she doesn't believe in the paranormal. This was 2009 or 10, and I'd lived in a house for several years with my wife and two dogs. I don't know much about the previous owners, but they had lived in the house since it was built in 2005. Several times I had seen what appeared to be a dog, small, black, and quick, disappear around the corner, sometimes in dim light and sometimes during the day with the windows providing plenty of light. I told my wife, and she said she had similar experiences. One evening, sitting on the couch with the dogs reading, I heard the distinctive trot 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 of a dog coming down the hall from the bedrooms. Of course, the dogs were with me on the couch, and when I looked towards the sound, there was nothing there. The same thing happened a few weeks later when my wife was also in the room. I heard it first and said, "Do you hear that?" She said, "What? The dog coming to see us?" Then she noticed that both the dogs were again on the couch. The craziest part happened a few months after we started noticing things. We were asleep in the main bedroom with the door closed. The dog slept in the bedroom with us, the little one on the bed and the big one on the floor. We had just dozed off and were awakened by a distinctive and disturbing sound. A dog was getting ready to throw up. As any pet owner knows, you usually get 4 or 5 dry heaves as a warning to get the dog off the carpet. We both identified the sound as coming from the hallway, and I sprang into action. Finding nothing on the other side of the door, I looked for the dogs in the bedroom. As before, they were both fast asleep. We spent the next 20 minutes talking about it, then went back to sleep. That was the last we ever saw or heard of our little visitor. Number 1. Old farmhouse. In this house, I experienced the most paranormal activity. My parents and younger brother all witnessed these events, so I know they are true. My dad's a cop, and at this point was working all of the terrible rotating shifts that all new rookies would be given. This meant that my mom was often at home alone with us kids, especially at night. Little things started happening at first. Picture frames would swing on the walls like someone had brushed their hands against them. Lights would go on and off for no reason. We would hear footsteps upstairs when no one else was home. And our dog would get locked in random rooms without explanation. The first truly terrifying experience we had was when my brother was around 3. He was tucked in for the night while my mom and I watched TV. I had gone into his room with my mom to say goodnight and had watched her close the window, place the rocking chair near his bed, close the door, and turn off the lights. We went down to the TV and heard whispering noises coming from the baby monitor she had in his room. As we listened more, we heard a loud shriek and banging noises. We both rocketed up from the couch and ran to his room. The light was on, the rocking chair was next to the now open window, rocking back and forth, and the door was wide open. I had never seen my mom so terrified before. My brother was fast asleep under the covers and was far too small to ever move the rocking chair himself. After that night, I had terrible night terrors where I would wake everyone up screaming and throwing things. I would sleepwalk and talk to someone in my closet called Sally and would hear voices all day, every day. My parents witnessed objects moving around with no visible cause, would hear the voices talking back to me while I was sleepwalking, and would hear me talking in a low, guttural voice that was not my own. The event that made us move was when we had gone out for groceries in midwinter after a fresh snowfall. We were about an hour getting groceries, so there was enough snow to cover all our footprints. My dad had closed and locked the front door, had turned off the lights, and because it was winter, the windows were all closed and locked. Some of the windows were even painted shut. When we got back from groceries, every single window was open. Music was blasting from the stereo, the front door was off its hinges, and the lights were all on. At this point, my dad told us to stay in the car while he called a buddy of his on shift to help him clear the house. As my dad went up to the house, he noticed that there were absolutely no footprints leading to or from the door. None in the yard or backyard either. There was no one in the house and no signs of anyone ever being there. The most terrifying part of this event was that the painted windows had been ripped open. The wood had splintered, and we all agreed that no human could have the strength to do that. On top of being painted shut, my dad had also nailed some shut too to avoid a draft. These windows were opened as well. We moved after that, and I believe that whatever was in that house followed me to the next 5 places. Number 2, tiny city home. At this house, we didn't experience anything too frightening until the end of our stay there. Little things happened throughout the first 3 years that spooked us a bit, but were harmless. Light switches would click on and off while we watched. The dog would bark and growl at nothing in corners and at the ceiling. My dad would always lose his keys and they would show up in the crawl space that we had under the house. I was always terrified of that crawl space. None of us would ever go near it without someone else being there. When I would sleepwalk, I would always end up in the crawl space with the lights off. After the first 3 years, my mum got really sick and almost died 3 times on the operating table. With all the stress of watching her go through this, whatever was in the house got stronger and more bold. We would wake up to find pictures of our family smashed or on the ground, scratches on the door to the crawl space, and would see shadow figures out the corner of our vision. Once, when I was taking a bath, I was held under the water by my head from what felt like a hand. I knocked all the bottles off the tub, which alerted my dad. He came in and swears up and down to this day that he saw a disembodied hand holding me under. After my brother got pushed down the stairs, we finally decided to move. Number 3, country haven home. My parents never saw the house before they bought it. It was cheap and close to my dad's new posting, and that's all that mattered. My parents currently still live there. It has 5 levels, including 2 basement levels. I only lived at this house for 3 years, but I had multiple frightening experiences that still haunt me. The most notable was when I was home alone with my dog. I was watching TV in the basement and decided to get a snack. I left my dog laying on the couch sleeping. As soon as I hit the kitchen, I heard Charlie barking and snarling at something in the basement. He had never made those sounds before, so I was rightly scared crapless. I called my dad and begged him to come home because I thought someone was in the house. He told me to run out the front door and go to the neighbours. The problem with that was that I would have to run past the basement and whatever was down there to get to the front door. Even running to the side door had the same issue, so I booked it. As I ran past the basement, I saw a shadowy figure standing in front of my dog. Charlie had all the hair on his back standing up. When Charlie saw me running, he hightailed it out of there too and joined me at the neighbours. My dad came home with his gun and went through the house. No one was there. A few days after that experience, I moved out to go to university. My parents haven't had any paranormal experiences since I moved out. Number 4, dorms. In the dorms I lived in, it was apartment style. We lived in a 5-bedroom detached house. I had 4 roommates, 2 bathrooms and a kitchen for us to cook in. All of my roommates experienced their own paranormal events while living with me here. One of them didn't believe in ghosts before, but now does. We would hear people talking in the vents when we were all in the common area not talking. The scariest conversation we heard coming from the vents was someone screaming at their friend to F off. We were all sitting in the kitchen not talking because we were eating. No one else was in the house with us, and we all ran from the house and sat on the porch until it was time to go to bed. My one roommate experienced her alarm going off at 3 a.m. every morning for the entire year. Even when it was unplugged with no batteries, it would go off. All of us would see creepy shadows and people walking through the house and up the stairs. One roommate had her boyfriend run out the house at 4 a.m. scared crapless. He never told us what happened and he never came back. Our landlord at one point thought we had an illegal 6th person staying with us because she would always see someone staring out of the attic window. The attic that was always locked. The worst experience at this house was when all 5 of us were standing in the kitchen and we heard laughing coming from the vents. As we were frozen listening, the fridge door whipped open and the kettle turned on simultaneously. We all stayed in our cars that night. Number 5 and 6, my own 2 apartments. I decided to move into my own apartment for the duration of school because of health issues and the activity that scared all my roommates. I had to move from the first apartment about 3 months in because I found black mold. My landlord moved me to a different unit. In the first apartment, I only experienced light switches going on and off, my kettle being turned on in the middle of the night, and noises I couldn't explain. In my current apartment, however, I've recently been experiencing feelings of heaviness and I'm terrified constantly. It feels like someone mean is watching me and wants me to fail. Because of COVID, I'm now confined to my apartment and working from home. In multiple Zoom meetings, my coworkers have asked me who is in the room with me. I'm alone. I have no pets or roommates, but my coworkers swear up and down that they see someone walking back and forth in the frame. I've had clients ask who else is talking to me because they can hear someone in the background speaking. My boyfriend has noticed me talking to someone in my sleep while I'm sitting up in bed. My boyfriend had an experience that changed his mind completely about ghosts. He was sitting at the kitchen table while I was cooking and heard someone yell into his ear to get out. He freaked out and turned around just to have a potted plant thrown at his head. He refuses to stay at my place and tries to limit the amount of time I spend at his to avoid inviting whatever is attached to me into his place. The night after my friend cleansed my place, I was startled awake by feeling something jumping onto the bed. I flipped on the light and saw that one of my slippers had been thrown approximately 4 feet across the apartment onto my bed. I left the lights on and prayed until I fell asleep again. When I woke up in the morning, clothes, shoes, and papers were scattered around my previously clean apartment. For that day and night, I didn't experience anything else. I figured whatever my friend did helped. About 3 days after the cleansing, I was standing in my kitchen cooking when I heard scratching coming from the wall next to me. For context, that wall light leads directly into my closet. I opened the closet door expecting to see a mouse or rat, but instead, I found a tidy closet with nothing pushed against the wall. The wall is thin, basically just a sheet of drywall, so there was definitely nothing in the wall. The entire time I was cooking, the scratching continued and got louder. I turned on some music and tried to ignore it. That night, I felt something crawling up my bed, almost like a cat or a dog would. I have neither of these in my apartment. I had left the kitchen light on so I could see my room pretty well. I could see imprints of whatever was walking up my bed towards me. I freaked out and ran to the living room. I slept on the couch that night. My coworkers are still experiencing something walking in my camera during Zoom calls, and my clients have begun hearing whispering voices on my end of the phone, even when I'm home alone. The final experience that I've had since the cleansing was when I was sleeping over at my boyfriend's place. I had begged him to come and pick me up after the experience with the scratching. I had brought Missy with me and we were all cuddled up in his bed watching TV. My boyfriend fell asleep and I had turned off the TV when I heard some muffled footsteps outside his bedroom door. He has roommates, so I brushed it off and went to sleep. At around 3 a.m., my boyfriend sat straight up in bed and looked at the bedroom door. We've been dating for 2 years now and have been friends for 4. I have never once witnessed him sleepwalking or sleep talking. But this night, he was talking to something in the hallway. He was saying things like, "No, you need to leave now," or "You can't stay here." He turned to me at one point and said, "He's here for you," in the hallway. I was understandably freaked and tried to wake him up. He kept saying, "He's here, he's in the hallway, and you can't escape." I finally woke him up and asked him what was wrong and who was here, and he just said, "You should leave," and then fell back asleep. In the morning, when I asked him who was there, he shrugged and said he had a dream that someone was in the hallway asking for me, and he agreed to let them talk to me. I have no clue what was going on, but the fact that my boyfriend invited whatever it was into his bedroom freaks me out. His roommate helped me cleanse the house the next day. My boyfriend has now started having scratching noises in the house, and his roommates have all claimed to hear voices when no one's home. I haven't had any experiences myself since the incident at my boyfriend's. We are currently looking into bringing my parish priest in to bless us on my apartment. Whatever it is isn't violent, and it doesn't seem threatening, but it is very terrifying. Many of you suggested using a Ouija board or something else to talk to it, but I feel like that would make it worse and give it more energy to torment me. My mother had a bad Ouija board experience when she was young, and so did my father, so I'll never touch it. Hopefully, my new daily regimen will help. I don't think I've been doing it for long enough to make a difference. Things started happening again pretty slowly. It started with some odd noises such as scratching, banging, and what sounded like footsteps in the hallway. A few weeks after the cleansing, my boyfriend and I were getting photos taken by my parents. When we look at the photos afterwards, my dad pointed out what looked like a man in the background. The photo was mysteriously deleted from my parents' camera along with several others. It continued to escalate to the point where I was being dragged out of bed in the middle of the night by my feet, and my boyfriend was being touched and scratched by whatever was in my apartment. One night when I had my boyfriend over, we heard some scratching at the door. We paused to listen and could hear a male voice muttering to themselves on the other side of the door. We could hear the lock and the door handle jingling and rattling. My boyfriend went to look out of my peephole and saw a dirty old homeless man fiddling with my lock. We called the police because my boyfriend said that he was outside my door with a knife and a screwdriver. When the police arrived, the man was no longer there. They took us to the main office of our apartment complex and requested to see the security footage. I wish I had taken a video of what we saw. Even the police had no explanation. On the tapes, you could see an old man step off the elevator and walk to my door. You could clearly see he had a weapon of some sort in both hands. He stopped at my door and stared at it for at least 10 minutes. He kept tilting his head as though he was listening to something. Then, he began scratching at the door with what looked to be a knife. This is when it got even scarier. 2 police are then seen coming off the elevator and turning towards my door. They walk right to the door where the man is still standing and walk right past him. They swear up and down that the man was not at the door when they came. The thing that scared us the most was that while my boyfriend and I was chatting with the police with the door open, the man brushed past us all and went inside my apartment. None of us saw the man standing right next to the police for the 10 minutes we were stood chatting with them. No one saw him enter the apartment. The tapes clearly show a man, however we saw nothing. After seeing what was on the tapes, the cops and my boyfriend were rightly scared as heck. The cops called for backup to search the complex. While They then went and searched my apartment for the man. Nobody found anything. The only evidence that the man was there was of the tapes and scratches on the door. The only thing the police could do for me was tell me to move out. I've never seen a scared police officer before, and I hope to never see it again. I'm planning on moving out in February due to having to give 3 months' notice. After the incident with the police, I began hearing things and seeing things out of the corner of my eye again. And no matter how much incense I burn or how hard I pray, I still feel scared witless. My lights have been turning out daily. My devices have been glitching and making weird noises, and my neighbours complain of me screaming even when I'm not at home. I've started working from the office again and even had some experiences there too. The most memorable experience I had at work was when my co-worker and I were on a conference call with my management team. We both kept hearing noises. The tea kettle kept turning on and off, the lights kept flickering, and my management team kept asking who was in the office with us. They were quite mad when they thought they were just three of us in the office because of COVID restrictions. We are only allowed to be two people in the office at a time. My co-worker and I swore up and down that there wasn't even a janitor in the building with us. One of our managers even got a picture of what it looked like a tall man standing behind me and my partner. I will post it on here later if I can. She can't send the photo for some reason and it keeps getting deleted. Luckily, she has an iPhone and can go into her deleted photos to recover it. Every time she looks at the photo, it makes her glone fit, glitch, and turn off. My boyfriend and I recently moved into a new apartment after experiencing some crazy paranormal activity in our last apartment. This apartment is larger and newer than our last. It's a recently built 1-year-old condo building in a quiet part of the city, away from traffic and noise. It's the only building for 3 kilometers in either direction. We're on the top floor, so we don't have to listen to neighbors upstairs, and we have no neighbors beside us. The whole complex sits adjacent to a forest with multiple trails and a large lake. We thought it was paradise. The first month we were there, we had no paranormal occurrences and no suspicious activity. Our cat wasn't reacting to empty space like she had been before. My boyfriend and I were sleeping better and hiking all the time. We enjoyed the patio a lot and even had a little garden room for our plants. We hadn't needed my cousin to cleanse the place since we'd moved in, so we were very positive about finally being free of ghosts and demons. When we got comfortable, that's when the activity started again. It started small as it always does, with missing keys, shifted furniture, the cat being touched by something, and of course, small noises like scratching and tapping. We ignored it the best we could. We made noise in our space and stayed positive throughout all the new experiences. One night, we couldn't ignore it any longer. We had opened the closet in the hallway to fold some sheets we had washed when the door was ripped out of my boyfriend's hand and slammed shut. We had all of our windows and doors closed and didn't have any air conditioning on. When we tried to open it again, it wouldn't budge. There was no lock on this door, so we assumed it was jammed. We wedged it open with a screwdriver, and when we did, we saw little scratches on the bottom of the door that weren't there before. That was the point where my boyfriend and I called my cousin to do another cleansing. During the cleansing, you could hear rapid tapping on the ceiling. We have no upstairs neighbours as we're at the top floor, and heavy breathing from the linen closet. When she was finished and she told us that she felt like we were in danger, this made us very paranoid and upset. The next thing to happen made us both sick to our stomachs. We were asleep on the couch after watching a movie when the door of the linen closet directly beside the TV whipped open. All of the linens fell out the floor and the door fell off its hinge. For context, the linens were all in labelled plastic tubs that were hanging on the wall on a metal bar. The tubs were not moved when the sheets and towels were tossed onto the floor, nor was the bar. Ever since then, we've had the closet door swing open and closed randomly and had towels and sheets thrown all around. My boyfriend swears that he can see a dark shadow in the shape of a small person in the corner of the closet when it opens and closes. The cat won't even go near the door and has confined herself to the back bedroom. At night, we can hear scratching on the door and banging coming from the walls. Last night was horrible too. We were in bed trying to sleep when we heard a massive bang coming from the closet. My boyfriend was fed up at this point and screamed at it to shut up so we could sleep. We saw a black head-shaped figure poke out from the corner of the door frame. It had red eyes and was solid black. We couldn't see through it. We freaked out and slept in our car with the cat. This morning, we went in to make breakfast and found most of the apartment torn apart. Nothing was damaged except a few photo frames, luckily. We're glad we brought the cat with us. It looks as if the demon thing has found us again and now threatens to terrorize us in our new apartment. I'm hoping that we'll continue to be safe from physical harm as long as possible, but it's not likely. When my grandma left my abusive grandpa, many years before I was born, she moved herself and two of her three daughters, my mom and aunt, into a new house. My aunt met a guy and they started dating. He was what you would call a greaser, hot rod driving, leather jacket wearing, greased black haired having dude. This would have been the early 70s. Most nights he would park down the street and walk to her bedroom window, tap on it, and she would let him through it. Her bedroom was at the back of the house, and the driveway was gravel, and it went past my mom's bedroom. My mom told me every time he did it, she would hear his boots crunching in the gravel as he walked by. They would do whatever they did, and he'd climb back out of the window and leave. Somehow, she eventually met who would become my uncle, and they're still married. And she broke things off with the guy. He didn't take it well. One night he stopped by and tapped on the window. She let him in and they talked for over an hour, and he left. The phone rang in the living room and she went out to answer it. Her friend was on the other end, sobbing. She told my aunt that he had killed himself. He drove around in his hot rod with a buddy, drinking liquor and shooting mailboxes. They pulled into a convenience store parking lot and he shot himself in the face, killing himself. My aunt said that was impossible as he had just left her house. She looked up and saw him standing outside, staring at her through the living room window, with blood all over his face. She screamed, woke everyone in the house, and he disappeared. My aunt told them that night what had gone on. That was the only time she ever spoke about it. I've asked her a couple times to tell me, and she wouldn't. Grandma and Mum eventually told me about it years later at different times. From then on, my mum would hear his boots crunching in the gravel every night, and my aunt would hear him tap on the window. It got so bad for my aunt that she begged my mom to switch rooms. They did, and my mom heard the tapping on the window. Also, my grandma told me they'd always find his brand of cigarette butts in the ashtrays, and only he smoked them. A few other things that happened in that house before they moved, like my grandma woke up one morning an inch from the ceiling. When she screamed, the bed fell back to the floor. Back in 2008 or so, I happened to deliver pizza to that house. I asked the woman if anything strange went on there, and she froze. She said the back room window got tapped on all the time, as well as knocking on the side door. Even though the driveway was paved, she heard what sounded like boots on it all the time. Her husband worked nights, so he didn't believe her or the kids, but she said almost every night, something happened there. I was living with my grandma at the time for a number of reasons. I was only 18 or 19 then, and my grandpa had passed away a couple years before, leaving her in a two-family house all by herself. When I found out she was lonely and I needed a place to stay, when she offered to let me live with her, I happily accepted. I lived in the second family space. My grandfather had built the house back in the 30s and sometime later had added the big addition on the back so his daughter from his first marriage could live there for a while. I didn't change much of anything when I moved in. The furniture all stayed, which at that point was just a couch, love seat, two chairs, and some end tables with lamps on them. I only had my clothes and a small TV to bring. I laid a spare mattress she had on the floor between the couch and my TV. There was about a foot of space on either side of the mattress to the couch to my left and the TV to my right. I had my own door and stairs that went down to the basement. At the bottom of the steps was a small landing, the door into the basement, and a screen door to the right of it that went outside. The steps were concrete. I'm not sure when or why it started, but one night as I tried to fall asleep, I heard the door handle on the door at the bottom of the steps rattle, as if someone were trying to open it. I knew the sound it made well, because it was loose and rattled like that every time I opened the door to do laundry or whatever. I was scared that maybe someone had broken in, so I went to check it out and found nothing wrong and no one there. A few nights later, I heard it again, and then again a few nights after that. I checked each time and still found nothing. Then I started hearing footsteps climbing the concrete stairs to the door and at the top of the steps, and then that handle would shake. It scared the hell out of me because I was sure someone was there. Once again, I checked, and once again, I found nothing. The incidents became more and more frequent until it was happening every night. I quickly decided to not check every time, and I'd just lay there listening to it happen until it would eventually stop and I'd fall asleep. Every now and then it would extend farther to include footsteps on the floor between me and my TV, which was almost always behind me, since I liked to sleep on my right side facing the couch. One night I heard the floor there creak again, and I quickly spun my head around, expecting to see someone standing there. But once again, I saw nothing. I turned back around, laid my head down, and closed my eyes. And then, for whatever reason, I opened my eyes for a split second and shut them again. In that split second, I saw her. She was sitting on the couch, and though it was dark, I could see her well. Her skin was pale, and she was wearing a white nightgown that went to her knees. She had long, straight, white or blonde hair that hung past her shoulders, and her head was cocked to one side. I saw no face. I quickly opened my eyes again and screamed, but she was gone. That was the first night I heard any of those noises for a long time. It had lasted 6 months, the last 4 of which it had happened nightly. I heard the footsteps on the stairs a couple times after that, and the doorknob jiggled once or twice, but that was it, as far as that went. I was afraid to tell my grandma because I didn't want to scare her. When I finally did, she just nodded and said she saw shadow people all the time in the house, which I later saw myself when I was hanging out with her watching TV. She said the woman could have been my late grandpa's first wife, who had passed on many years before. That woman was mentally crazy and often walked the streets at night in a nightgown and bare feet. She would buy drugs from whomever. She also began going to church down the road that was one of Jim Jones's churches, and wrote all kinds of big checks to them for their trip to Jonestown. Apparently, she also let them have meetings in that part of the house where I was living. When my grandfather found out about the money and craziness that went on in the church, he made us stop going. It was right before the members all went on their trip to Jonestown. I'm not sure what spirit or spirits haunted the house if it wasn't her, or why they would be there. Nothing was there before the house was built except farmland. Years later, my wife and I moved in there and we saw a couple of weird things. At the time, we had a rebbed min pin, and I saw his backside rounding a corner and disappearing into the hall or another room, only to discover it wasn't him and nothing would be where I thought he was, numerous times. I have no idea what that was about. I also continued seeing shadow people. Currently, my mom lives there, though I haven't heard if anything has happened lately. For a while, my wife and I lived in that same space I used to stay while my mom lived in the main house. She once asked me if we had issues with things going missing, and if they ever turned up in different places. We did. I'm not sure if anything is going on now. I'll have to ask her.